I was a roofing contractor in Ohio when I learned my wife had turned my license, my reputation, and our dinner table routines into cover for another man. Not in some loud, sloppy way, not with motel receipts falling out of a purse or some dumb message lighting up on a phone. Marin did it through paperwork, city schedules, permit language, and the kind of boring details most people trust because they sound too dull to hide anything ugly. My name is Caleb Whitaker. At the time, I was 41, running a small roofing company with 2 crews, 1 old dump trailer, and a business line of credit that made me sleep badly every spring until storm season picked up. We lived outside Dayton, in a brick ranch we bought before prices went crazy, with a detached garage. I kept saying I'd turn into a rental unit someday. That plan was supposed to be our next step. Pay down the mortgage, build the unit, let it bring in some steady money, and maybe stop working on roofs when my knees finally quit forgiving me. Marin worked for the city permit office. She wasn't the woman at the front desk who stamped papers and sent people away. She was the one contractors asked for when a job got stuck between departments and nobody knew whether the hold was zoning, inspection, or occupancy. She could read a permit file like other people read a grocery list. I used to joke that she could make a grown builder apologize just by asking where he attached the revised site plan. That was part of what I loved about her. Marin was practical without being hard. She didn't panic, didn't waste motion, didn't make a situation bigger than it needed to be. When we were younger and I was still climbing roofs myself, she was the one who kept our bills sorted, reminded me when my liability policy renewed, and talked me down when one bad month made me think the company was finished. She made life feel like something you could handle if you put the right papers in the right order. Our marriage wasn't perfect, and I'm not going to pretend it was. I worked too much, especially after hailstorms, and I came home with my head full of numbers and complaints from homeowners who wanted free gutters because their cousin said so. Marin had her own pressure. The city was always short-staffed, builders were always mad at her, and half the time she got blamed for rules she didn't write. Some nights we ate dinner like 2 tired coworkers sharing a break room. Still, I thought we were solid in the boring ways that matter. The first change didn't feel like cheating. It felt like her job getting worse. She started mentioning after-hours occupancy inspections and emergency permit reviews for projects that were trying to close before the end of the month. That sounded believable to me because I knew how construction worked. If a developer had buyers waiting or a lender pushing, everybody suddenly needed the city to move faster than the city was built to move. The name that kept coming up was Neil Prescott. He managed private developments around the county, mostly townhomes and small commercial builds, the kind of projects where one delayed certificate could hold up a lot of money. Marin said his files were a mess. Then she said he was pushy. Then she started asking me, real casual, whether I'd ever worked with his subcontractors or heard if his builders paid on time. It didn't bother me at first. Contractors talk. City people hear things. That world overlaps whether you want it to or not. One Tuesday night in March, she came home late and set her work bag on the kitchen chair instead of by the hall closet where she always left it. I remember that because I had made spaghetti, and the sauce had dried around the edge of the pot while I waited. She said an occupancy inspection ran long because Prescott's people had missed a stair rail measurement and the inspector wanted her to look at the file before signing off. She sounded tired, irritated, normal. I asked, was that the townhouse project off Miller Road? She looked at me for half a second before answering. Not scared, not guilty, just a tiny pause, like I had stepped on a floorboard she didn't expect to creak. Then she said, no, different one. Same developer, different headache. I nodded and went back to the stove. It proved nothing. People pause, people get tired, people don't always want to explain work after they've already lived it all day. But later, while she showered, I stood in the kitchen rinsing 2 plates and realized I didn't know why she had corrected me so fast when I hadn't accused her of anything. That was the part I hated later. The first thing that bothered me was small enough that I felt embarrassed for noticing it. I didn't think my wife was having an affair. I thought maybe she was hiding some work problem, or maybe I had become the kind of husband who listened to tone because the marriage had gone quiet. I told myself to let it go, and for a little while I did. Over the next few weeks, Marin's late nights got easier for her to explain and harder for me to question. That was the strange part. She never sounded like she was inventing anything. She used the same irritated voice she used for every city problem, talking about incomplete punch lists, temporary certificates, missing signatures, and builders who acted like rules were personal insults. I understood enough of it to not want more details. That worked in her favor. If she said a project needed a same-day occupancy review because a lender walkthrough was happening Friday, I didn't ask her to explain the chain of approvals. I knew just enough construction language to accept the shape of the excuse, and she knew that. She started keeping a spare blouse in her car because, according to her, she never knew when she'd have to walk an unfinished property after office hours. She bought better shoes for site visits, not boots exactly, but those clean-looking waterproof ones office people wear when they want to look like they can handle gravel. She also started charging her phone in the laundry room instead of beside the bed. She said the bedroom outlet was loose, and it was, so I didn't argue. That's how most of it went. Every answer had enough truth around the edges. The questions about Neil Prescott kept showing up in places they didn't belong. We'd be watching TV, and she'd ask whether my crews had ever worked in a development with shared drainage easements. I'd be sorting invoices at the kitchen table, and she'd ask if a contractor could get blacklisted by suppliers for being slow pay. Once, while I was packing leftover ribs into a container, she asked if my license number ever appeared on subcontractor references when I gave estimates for bigger jobs. I looked at her and said, "Why?" She shrugged without looking up from the dishwasher. "A guy at work was complaining about contractor references. It made me think of you." That answer should have been fine. It wasn't. I couldn't explain why, not in a way that didn't make me sound like I was reaching. My name, my license, and my business had always been normal parts of our life. Marin had helped me renew paperwork more times than I could count. She knew my liability carrier, my bond information, my workers' comp certificate, all of it. She knew because she had helped me survive the years when I was too busy doing the work to keep the office side clean. One Thursday, she asked if I still had good standing with the city inspection department. I laughed because I thought she was teasing me. She didn't laugh back right away. She said Prescott had mentioned some roof drainage issue on one of his properties, and she wondered if maybe one of my old bids had been attached somewhere as a reference. I said, "I haven't bid anything for him." She said, "I know. I didn't say you did." There was nothing wrong with the words. The way she said them made me feel like I had misunderstood something I had heard correctly. Then she softened, touched my shoulder, and told me I was tired. That was one of her habits when she wanted a conversation to close. She didn't slam doors or get dramatic. She made you feel like the reasonable thing was to stop. I did stop. I went out to the garage and pretended to look for a box of coil nails I already knew was in the trailer. I stood there under the fluorescent light with my hands on a shelf, feeling stupid. I actually said it out loud once, quiet enough that nobody in the house could hear me. "You're making stuff up!" That's where I was for a while. Not suspicious enough to act, not calm enough to forget it. I'd watch her move around the kitchen like nothing was wrong, opening mail, rinsing coffee mugs, asking if I'd called the gutter supplier. Some nights, she was warm, almost extra normal, like she knew I needed just enough of the old Marin to stay settled. Other nights, she was distant and called it stress. The second detail came from a parking charge. I wasn't looking for evidence. I was paying the joint credit card, the one we used for groceries, gas, and household stuff. There was an $8 parking charge from a garage downtown on a night she'd said she was at an after-hours inspection near Miller Road. It wasn't a lot of money, and downtown parking wasn't strange for her job. The problem was the Miller Road site had surface parking, and I knew that because I had driven past it twice that week for a roof estimate nearby. I stared at that line on the statement longer than I should have. $8, a number so small it felt ridiculous to care about. I could hear Marin's voice in my head telling me I was tired, telling me I was connecting things because work had me wound up. So I didn't confront her. I asked a harmless question the next morning while she was buttering toast. "Did Prescott's Miller Road thing ever get cleared?" She didn't look up. "Which one?" "The one with the stair rail issue." "Oh, yeah, finally. Why?" I shrugged and took my coffee from the counter. Just wondered. She watched me for a second, and I felt it then. Not guilt exactly, more like calculation. She was trying to decide how much I knew, and the awful part was I didn't know anything yet. I only knew her answer had made denial harder to hold. The next day, I opened the city permit portal on my laptop after Marin went to bed. That sounds more dramatic than it was. Contractors use that portal all the time to check inspection status, permit numbers, correction notices, and whether some city office has moved a file from one box to another. I wasn't breaking into anything. I was looking at the same public-facing records I'd used 100 times for my own jobs. I searched the Miller Road development first because that was the name I had heard most. There were several permits under Prescott's company, and most of them had the usual mess of inspection notes. Framing passed, electrical corrections pending, plumbing rechecks scheduled, occupancy hold released. I clicked through them one by one, feeling like an idiot the whole time because I didn't even know what I expected to find. The stair rail issue was real. That bothered me more than if it had been fake. There was a correction note about a handrail height problem, and it had been entered 2 days before Maren came home late and told me about it. But the occupancy review had been cleared at 3:18 inches the afternoon. Her story had been that it ran long after hours, and I sat there looking at that timestamp while the refrigerator hummed behind me. I didn't move for a while. One part of me wanted to wake her up and ask why she said she was there late when the file showed the review closed before most people left work. Another part of me kept offering explanations. Maybe the portal updated wrong. Maybe she stayed to discuss another part of the project. Maybe she said inspection when she meant paperwork. Marriage gives you a lot of ways to protect the person you love, even when protecting them starts making you feel foolish. I checked 3 more dates from memory. 2 were useless because I couldn't remember exactly what she had said that night. 1 matched a night she'd come home close to 9, saying a temporary occupancy sign-off had become a mess. That permit had been marked complete at 2:46 p.m. There were no evening notes, no late hold, no after-hours entry on the public side. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark dining room with my hand still on the mouse. I felt embarrassed before I felt angry. Embarrassed that I had cooked dinner and reheated it like a patient husband while she walked in carrying a story that might have been made for me. Embarrassed that she knew exactly which words would sound normal enough to stop me from asking more. The following morning, I almost said something while she poured coffee into a travel mug. She was wearing the waterproof shoes and a gray jacket I'd seen 100 times. Her hair was clipped back, and she looked like the woman who used to remind me to submit my renewal forms before the deadline. I had a sentence sitting right behind my teeth. Why did the permit close at 3 if you were there until 8? I didn't say it. I stirred my coffee even though I drink it black. That's how close I was to doing something stupid. I knew if I asked too early, she'd explain 1 record away, clean up whatever else existed, and make me feel like the problem was my tone, not her story. So I went back to things I could check without asking permission. I downloaded the joint credit card statements for the last 3 months and searched for parking. There were 5 charges from the same downtown garage, all on nights Maren had described as late city work tied to Prescott or one of his developments. The charges were small enough to hide in plain sight: $8, $11, $9.50. Normal money. Normal enough that I had paid the bill twice without seeing it. Then I pulled up the business fuel log. That part hurt in a different way. My part-time bookkeeper, Russell, had set up a simple system for the company trucks because gas costs were getting sloppy. Maren sometimes used my older pickup when her car was blocked in or when she said she needed to haul boxes of old permit files from a storage room. I never cared. We were married, and the truck sat there most evenings anyway. The fuel card showed 2 late fill-ups on nights she used that pickup. Again, nothing huge. But 1 receipt placed the truck near the downtown corridor, not near Miller Road or any of the outlying sites she had named. I looked at the timestamp, then at the parking charge, then at the permit closure time. Alone, each one was explainable. Together, they made my stomach feel heavy. I printed the pages because I didn't trust myself to keep staring at them on a screen. I spread them across the workbench in the garage and wrote dates on a legal pad. Permit closed at 3:18. Parking garage at 7:42. Fuel at 9:16. Home around 9:40. Tired voice, stair rail story. I wasn't building a case yet. Not really. I was trying to prove to myself that I wasn't becoming the kind of man who turns his wife's work schedule into a conspiracy. That night, Maren came home with takeout and kissed the side of my head like nothing in the house had shifted. She asked if I'd heard back from a homeowner in Kettering and reminded me that my liability renewal was due next month. She was helpful, casual, almost sweet. I stood at the counter opening soy sauce packets, and all I could think was that she was still managing the same life she was using to hide from me. After that, I got quieter in a way Marin noticed but couldn't name. I still answered questions. I still took the trash out, still asked if she wanted coffee, still went to estimates and came home with tar on my boots. But I stopped volunteering things. I stopped telling her which homeowners were difficult, which bids were close, which contractors had called me asking for references. It felt strange holding back ordinary information from my own wife, but by then, ordinary information had started to feel useful to somebody else. She picked up on it after about a week. We were eating chicken salad at the kitchen table, and she asked why I was being weird. That was the word she used. Not worried or distant. Weird. I looked down at my plate longer than I needed to and told her I was tired from work. She reached across the table and touched my wrist, and for 1 second, I wanted badly for that to be real. I wanted the whole thing to be a mistake I could apologize for in my own head. Then she said, "You've been tense every time I mention the city." I hadn't said that. I hadn't even thought I was showing it, but she had noticed the shape of what I was avoiding, and that told me she was watching me too. I didn't answer right away, because if I opened my mouth too fast, I was going to ask about the parking garage, and once I did that, I'd lose whatever chance I had to understand the whole thing. So I shrugged and said, "The city usually costs me money." She smiled a little, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You always say that." "I always mean it." That should have ended it. It didn't. Later that night, she told me she had another late review coming up Friday, something about Prescott's development needing clarification before a lender walkthrough. She said it while folding towels, like it was annoying but routine. I nodded and kept matching socks, and my hands felt clumsy. Friday gave me a date before it happened, and I hated how fast my mind started arranging around it. I didn't follow her. I want that clear. I thought about it, and I'm not proud of that. I sat in my truck outside a supply house that Friday afternoon after my last estimate and considered driving toward Miller Road just to see if her car was there. I even started the engine again after I'd already parked. Then I shut it off, sat there with both hands on the wheel, and realized I was about to turn myself into the kind of man she could point at later and call unstable. Instead, I went home. I wrote the time down when she left. I wrote down what she said before she walked out. Emergency clarification, lender walkthrough, Prescott being impossible. I wrote those words because they were hers, and I didn't want to remember them wrong later. Then I cleaned the kitchen, watched half an inning of a Reds game I couldn't follow, and waited. She came home at 9:27. I remember the exact minute because I had stopped pretending not to look at the clock. She had that tired, irritated face again, but there was a looseness to her too, like the hard part of her night had already happened somewhere else. She set her keys on the counter and said, "Don't ask. It was ridiculous." I almost did ask. The question was right there. Which permit number? Which inspector? Why would a lender walkthrough need you after hours when the city portal already had the issue logged? I could feel my face getting hot, and I had to turn toward the sink so she wouldn't see it. I said, "There's leftover pasta if you want it," and she said she'd eaten something at her desk. The next morning, I checked the portal. The Prescott file she had described was updated at 1:52 p.m. No evening change. No new correction after that. A separate permit under the same development had a note at 4:07, but it had nothing to do with occupancy. That was when I stopped trying to make the records kinder than they were. I made copies of everything. Public permit pages, credit card lines, fuel card receipts, dates from the family calendar on the fridge. I took pictures of the whiteboard in my garage where I kept crew schedules because 2 of the nights she used my truck were nights both company vehicles were already assigned, and she had specifically asked for the old pickup. I didn't know yet what mattered legally and what didn't. I only knew I needed the dates to stay still. A few days later, I called a divorce attorney from the parking lot of a Menards. Her name was Dana Ruiz, and she didn't sound impressed by drama. That helped. I told her I had public records, shared account charges, and business fuel logs that didn't line up with my wife's explanations. She asked if I had hacked anything. I said no. She asked if I had confronted Marin. I said no, but barely. Dana told me to keep it that way until she saw the documents. Walking back into Menards afterward felt strange. People were buying mulch and light switches, and I was standing there with my phone in my hand trying to understand that my marriage had become something I needed legal advice for. I bought the wrong size vent flashing and didn't notice until I got back to the truck. For a few minutes, I just sat there looking at the receipt, angry at myself for being able to mess up something simple while being careful about something terrible. Marin kept acting normal, and that became the cruelest part. She reminded me to email my insurance certificate to a homeowner. She asked if I wanted to invite her brother over for Memorial Day. She put my work shirts in the dryer on low because she knew they shrank. Every helpful thing she did landed wrong now because I could see how easily care and control could wear the same face. The confrontation started becoming unavoidable when she asked me to write an email vouching for Prescott's subcontractor on a drainage repair. She brought it up on a Sunday morning while I was sitting at the kitchen table with invoices spread out in front of me. She said it would be nothing official, just a short note that I'd heard they did clean work. I looked at her across the table, and for the first time, I understood she wasn't just hiding behind my world, she was still trying to use it. I didn't answer her right away. I kept my pen in my hand and looked at the invoice in front of me like I was still adding numbers. She had asked for that email in the same voice she used when reminding me to pick up dishwasher tabs. Small request, normal morning. One sentence from me that would put my name beside a man I had already started to understand too well. "What's the subcontractor's name?" I asked. She was standing by the counter with her coffee, and I saw her shoulders loosen because the question sounded cooperative. She told me the company name, then added that Prescott was under pressure from his lender and just needed clean references in the file. She said I didn't have to lie, just say I'd heard good things. That was the first time I heard my own business reputation being handled like it was a spare tool in the garage. I said, "I haven't heard good things." Her face changed, but not much. You know what I mean. "No," I said, "I don't." She set her mug down harder than she meant to. "Caleb, I'm asking for one professional courtesy. You do this stuff all the time." "I do it for people I've worked with. It's not that serious." That line almost got me. Not because it was convincing, but because she sounded annoyed, like I was being difficult about something harmless. I had spent weeks swallowing questions, and she was still standing in our kitchen asking me to make her lie cleaner. I wanted to lay every page on the table right then. I wanted to ask why she needed my name near Prescott again and again. Instead, I closed the invoice folder and said I had to meet a homeowner. I drove straight to Dana's office with the documents in a cardboard file box on the passenger seat. She had already reviewed copies, but I brought the originals I had printed because I needed someone else to tell me I wasn't crazy. Dana went through them slowly. Public permit timestamps, joint credit card parking charges, fuel card receipts, my notes about what Marin had said on each date. She didn't make a big face or call it a smoking gun. She said, "This is enough to ask very specific questions." That was not as satisfying as I wanted it to be. I think part of me still wanted someone to declare the whole thing solved, like a judge banging a gavel in a movie. Dana didn't do that. She told me the affair itself mattered emotionally, but the legal pressure came from Marin trying to pull my business name and marital finances into whatever she was doing. She told me not to send the email, not to threaten Prescott, and not to warn Marin how much I had. So I didn't. I went home and told Marin I wasn't comfortable vouching for a subcontractor I didn't know. She stared at me for a long moment, then said, "You're making this weird again." I almost laughed, but it wouldn't have sounded like laughing. I said maybe, and walked out to the garage before I said more. 2 weeks later, we were in a conference room for what Marin thought was a preliminary divorce discussion about finances. I had filed quietly. She had been served at work, which I didn't plan for drama, but I won't pretend I felt sorry about it. She came in with her attorney, looking controlled and offended, like the divorce itself was an overreaction she planned to manage. At first, she stayed with the version that made her sound exhausted and me sound suspicious. She said I had become withdrawn. She said my work stress made me read into ordinary things. She said her position required irregular hours and that I had always known that. Her attorney used phrases like demanding municipal schedule and misinterpretation of professional obligations. Dana let them talk. Then she opened the binder. She didn't accuse Marin of sleeping with Neil Prescott in the first sentence. She started with dates. March 12, permit release at 3:18 p.m., downtown parking charge at 7:42 p.m., fuel card use at 9:16 p.m., Marin home at approximately 9:40 after telling me she had been held up by that same occupancy issue, then March 27, then April 9. Then, the Friday she had warned me about ahead of time, the one with the lender walkthrough that had no evening permit activity at all. Marin looked at me before she looked at the papers. That stuck with me. Not because she was sorry, but because she understood I had sat across from her for weeks knowing enough to wait. She said, "Those records don't mean what you think." Dana said, "Then explain what they mean." Marin's attorney touched her arm lightly, telling her without words to be careful. Marin pulled her arm back. She said she had off-site meetings sometimes. She said city work didn't always appear in the public portal. She said I didn't understand how permit coordination worked. That last one landed exactly how she meant it to land, like I was still the roofer who needed her to translate the grown-up paperwork. I said I understand my license number. The room got quiet in a practical way, not a dramatic one. Dana slid forward the draft email Marin had asked me to send, the note where she wanted me to vouch for Prescott's subcontractor. It wasn't sent, but I had written down the request the day she made it. Dana placed it beside the permit dates and the parking records. Marin said that was separate. I said, then why was Neil Prescott in all of it? She didn't answer. Her attorney asked for a break. During that break, Marin stood near the window with her back turned, and I watched Neil's name sit there on those pages like a stain nobody could wipe off fast enough. The first real consequence came before anyone admitted anything. Dana informed them that we would be requesting a deeper review of any marital funds, business references, or documents where my company name had been used in connection with Prescott's projects. Marin turned around then. "You're trying to ruin my job." I shook my head. "No, I'm trying to keep you from using mine." The divorce didn't end in that conference room. I wish stories worked that cleanly, but they don't. Marin didn't suddenly confess, and nobody handed me a perfect victory because I had dates on paper. What happened was slower, uglier, and more ordinary than that. Her attorney stopped treating me like a jealous husband and started treating the documents like a problem that had to be managed. Marin stayed with her version for a while. She said the parking charges were meetings she couldn't discuss because of city business. She said the fuel card was an accident, that she must have used my truck without thinking because we were married and the lines between personal and business were never perfect. She said the Prescott email request was me twisting a harmless favor into something dirty. Every explanation had just enough gray in it to make people uncomfortable, which was how she had survived so long inside the lie. Neil Prescott protected himself fast. His name disappeared from her mouth first, then from the explanations. During discovery, when records were requested around any project where my company name appeared or was referenced, his side sent back the driest, coldest answers I've ever read. No personal relationship acknowledged, no improper influence admitted, no special consideration requested. He wrote like a man sealing a door from the inside while someone else was still in the hallway. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I cared about Neil, but because I realized Marin had risked our marriage, my business reputation, and her city position for someone who treated her like a liability the second paperwork got involved. I wanted to feel satisfied watching that happen. Mostly, I felt tired. There's a kind of humiliation in seeing the person who betrayed you get betrayed by the person they chose, and still not feeling sorry enough to forget what they did to you. The city didn't fire Marin overnight. That would have been too simple. What happened was an internal review after my attorney raised questions about whether my contractor license or references had been discussed in relation to Prescott's files. She was moved off development files involving him and a few related contractors while they sorted it out. Some people at her office thought I was trying to punish her, some probably still do. I learned not to chase every version of me that other people wanted to believe. In the divorce, the affair itself wasn't the hammer people imagine. The hammer was the pattern. The joint card charges, the fuel card use, the parking records, the public permit times, and the attempt to pull my name into a subcontractor reference all showed something organized. Not one bad night. Not confusion. Not a marriage drifting and two people making mistakes. It showed Marin using the ordinary trust between us as a tool while expecting me to keep supplying the handle. We ended up selling the house. I didn't want to. That detached garage had been my little future sitting in the backyard, unfinished but still possible. My attorney told me fighting to keep it would cost more than it was worth, and for once I listened before pride got expensive. The sale paid off debt, closed the shared line of credit attached to the property, and gave me enough room to move the business accounts into cleaner shape. I rented a smaller place with a garage that leaks when it rains, but nobody in that house has access to my paperwork unless I hand it to them. Marin lost more than money. though she would probably say I took money from her. She lost the role she had built inside our marriage. She had been the organized one, the translator, the person who understood forms and systems and could make me feel lucky she was handling it all. After the records were laid out, that role didn't belong to her anymore. I didn't need her to explain what I was seeing, and I think that bothered her worse than the settlement. The last time we spoke in person, she was calm in that old way of hers. She said, "I never meant for it to touch your business." I believed that, strangely enough. I don't think she started out planning to drag my name into anything. I think she got used to small conveniences. A late review here, a borrowed truck there, a professional question at dinner, a reference she thought I'd send because I had always trusted her reasons before. That's how she crossed the line. Not in one big leap, but by stepping over it so many times, she stopped looking down. I still think about the night I almost asked her about the 3:18 timestamp while she was pouring coffee. Part of me wishes I had, because maybe I could have saved myself weeks of sitting with it alone. Another part of me knows she would have explained that one page away, and I would have wanted to believe her because believing her was easier than rebuilding my life. Waiting didn't make me cold. It kept me from handing her the chance to clean up the mess before I understood how wide it was. I don't feel like I won. I kept my business clean, protected my license, and stopped being useful to a lie that was eating through my own house. That's not victory exactly. It's more like getting your keys back from someone who had been driving your life around while telling you the engine sounded fine. If this story stayed with you, hit like, share it with someone who understands how quiet betrayal actually works, and subscribe for more stories like this one. I'd like to know what you think about this part of it. Would you have confronted Marin after the first permit timestamp, or waited like I did? Was Caleb right to protect his business before demanding answers? And when someone uses your trust as part of the cover, is that worse than the affair itself?